The first time I saw the train listed, I thought it was a mistake. I had been standing on the frozen platform of Blackridge Station, collar pulled tight around my neck, breath fogging the air as snow drifted lazily under the orange glow of the streetlights. Christmas Eve had emptied the town. Shops were closed, houses dark, and the station felt abandoned, as if the world had quietly stepped away for the night. I wasn't supposed to be there. My bus home had been canceled due to the storm, and the last regular train had left hours ago. I was only at the station because I had nowhere else to wait, nowhere warm, nowhere safe. The old digital departure board flickered overhead, cycling through destinations that hadn't changed in years. Then, for just a second, a new line appeared. 0311, northbound, platform 3. No destination listed, no operator, no delay notice. Just a time that felt wrong. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The line vanished, replaced by the familiar, empty schedule. I laughed quietly to myself, the sound thin and nervous in the vast, hollow station. Fatigue, I told myself, Christmas exhaustion, my mind filling in gaps where nothing existed. But the unease didn't leave. There was something about that time, 0311. It sat heavy in my chest, like a memory I couldn't quite reach. I checked my phone. No signal. The battery indicator flickered from 12% to empty and back again. The screen dimmed, then brightened on its own. The clock ticked loudly above me. 0302. I pulled my coat tighter and paced the platform, boots crunching against thin ice. Platform 3 had been closed for years. Everyone in Blackridge knew that. The tracks there led nowhere anymore. They were cut off after the northern towns were evacuated, after the accident no one liked to talk about. I told myself not to look, but my feet carried me there anyway. Platform 3 sat at the far end of the station, lights dimmer, ceiling lower, walls stained with decades of moisture and neglect. Snow had blown in through broken panels, gathering in soft drifts along the edge. The tracks beyond were swallowed by darkness. No train should have been able to reach this platform. And yet, the air felt different here. Colder, heavier, as if the darkness itself was waiting. The departure board flickered again. 0311, now boarding. My stomach dropped. I stared at the sign, heart pounding, pulse loud in my ears. The letters glitched, warping slightly as though the screen were struggling to hold them in place. I scanned the platform for staff, for another passenger, for anyone who could tell me this was a prank. I was alone. The station doors behind me creaked softly, swaying though there was no wind. Somewhere deep within the building, metal groaned, followed by a low vibration that I felt through the soles of my boots. A sound began to rise from the tracks. At first, it was distant, a low rumble, almost imperceptible like thunder underground. Then it grew louder, heavier, accompanied by the unmistakable screech of metal on metal. A train was coming. My mind screamed that it was impossible. The tracks were dead, the power lines were inactive. No train had passed through Platform 3 in over a decade. And yet, headlights bloomed in the darkness. They were wrong. Too dim, too yellow, like old eyes opening in the dark. The train emerged slowly, its shape materializing piece by piece. Rusted steel, windows clouded with grime, paint flaking away to reveal layers of decay beneath. The logo on the side was one I didn't recognize, its edges blurred as though it refused to be properly seen. The train hissed as it pulled to a stop. The doors did not open. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The engine idled with a deep, uneven growl as if breathing. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming to run, to get as far away as possible. Then the doors slid open. The sound was wrong. Not the clean pneumatic release of modern trains, but a wet, dragging scrape, like something being torn open. Warm air spilled out, thick and stale, carrying the scent of old fabric, dust, and something faintly metallic. The lights inside flickered on, revealing rows of seats upholstered in dark red material that looked almost black in the low light. And the passengers. They sat perfectly still. Men, women, children dressed in winter clothes from different decades. Wool coats, old scarves, outdated hats. Their faces were pale, eyes open but unfocused, mouths slack, expressions frozen somewhere between exhaustion and resignation. None of them moved. None of them blinked. I took a step back. The departure board chimed softly. Final call. I shook my head, heart hammering violently. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mind scrambled for explanations, but every logical path collapsed under the weight of what I was seeing. Then one of the passengers turned their head. Just slightly. Their eyes locked onto mine. They smiled. It was a small, strange smile, lips trembling as if held in place by effort alone. Their eyes were glassy, wet, filled with something that looked terrifyingly close to relief. They raised a hand, not waving, pointing at the empty space beside them. The doors began to close. Panic surged through me, sharp and overwhelming. I didn't know why, but I knew with absolute certainty if the doors shut without me inside, something far worse would happen. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I ran. My boots slipped on the icy platform as I lunged forward, heart pounding, breath ragged. I crossed the threshold just as the doors slammed shut behind me with a heavy, final thud. The warmth vanished instantly. The inside of the train was colder than the platform, the air stale and unmoving. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. Every passenger stared straight ahead again, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, shaking, chest heaving. The train lurched and began to move. No announcement, no warning. Outside the windows, the station lights faded, swallowed by darkness. The tracks beneath us screamed as the train accelerated, plunging north into a place that should not have existed. I swallowed hard, dread pooling in my stomach. Somewhere deep inside me, a quiet, horrifying thought surfaced. This train didn't just run once a year. It only appeared once a year. And now, I was on it. By the time I stepped onto the train, the doors slid shut behind me with a sound that felt final. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft, mechanical seal that told me, without words, that turning back was no longer an option. The warmth inside was wrong. It wasn't comforting. It wasn't the dry, humming heat of an old locomotive struggling against winter. It was thick, damp, almost organic, like the air inside a living thing. The smell hit me next. Not rot, not smoke. Something sweeter, metallic, like old copper coins warmed in a closed hand. The carriage lights flickered once, then steadied. Rows of seats stretched forward, upholstered in deep red fabric that looked darker than it should have been, as if it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. And every seat was occupied. They sat perfectly still. Men, women, children, elderly couples, families dressed in winter coats, scarves wrapped tight around necks, gloves folded neatly in laps. They looked normal. Too normal, like mannequins arranged with obsessive care. Every face was angled forward. No one spoke, no one shifted, no one acknowledged my presence. I took a hesitant step down the aisle. My boots echoed far louder than they should have, the sound bouncing unnaturally off the carriage walls. With each step, my chest tightened. I became acutely aware of my breathing, the sound of air rasping in and out of my lungs, the only sign of life in the space. I passed a woman holding a small gift box on her lap. Red wrapping paper, green ribbon. Her fingers were wrapped around it so tightly her knuckles looked pale beneath the skin. I glanced at her face. Her eyes were open, wide, unblinking, staring straight ahead, glassy and dry like they hadn't closed in hours, maybe days. I swallowed and kept walking. A child sat 2 rows ahead, feet dangling above the floor, hands folded obediently. A knitted Santa hat rested on his head, crooked slightly to one side. His mouth was parted just enough to show his teeth. When I moved past him, I felt something brush my coat. His fingers, they were ice cold. I spun around, heart pounding, but his hand was back in his lap. He hadn't moved. None of them had. My skin crawled with the certainty that something had reached for me and then withdrawn, like a predator testing the edge of its leash. I hurried down the aisle, panic tightening my throat. At the far end of the carriage, the door to the next compartment stood open. Beyond it, I could see more seats, more passengers, all silent, all still. No conductor, no announcements, no sound of the train starting to move. I forced myself into an empty seat near the middle, gripping the armrests as if the train might throw me from it. The fabric beneath my palms felt damp, not wet, just warm. I looked down. Dark stains mottled the upholstery, irregular and old. They had soaked deep into the fabric, impossible to clean. I yanked my hands back, wiping them on my coat, nausea curling in my stomach. The train lurched. Not forward, not backward, sideways. The lights flickered again, dimming to a sickly yellow. A low vibration thrummed through the floor, climbing up my legs, settling deep in my bones. Somewhere far ahead, metal groaned against metal. The sound stretched and distorted like a scream dragged through a tunnel. The train began to move. Outside the windows, the platform slid away, swallowed by darkness. Snow streaked past in blurred white lines, moving too fast, as if we were accelerating far beyond what the tracks should allow. The town vanished in seconds, replaced by endless black forest, trees warped and leaning inward, branches clawing at the night. I leaned toward the man seated beside me, desperation overpowering fear. "Excuse me," I whispered. "Do you know where this train is going?" He didn't turn, didn't blink, didn't breathe. I leaned closer and immediately regretted it. His skin had a grayish tint stretched tight over his face. Tiny cracks lined the corners of his mouth like dried clay. His chest was completely still. No rise, no fall. He wasn't alive. The realization hit me like ice water. I looked around again, really looked this time. At the subtle sag of shoulders, the stiffness of necks, the unnatural stillness that no living body could maintain for this long. They weren't passengers. They were occupants. Preserved, positioned, placed. The child 2 rows ahead slowly turned his head. The movement was jerky, mechanical, accompanied by a faint crackling sound like frozen joints being forced to bend. His eyes locked on mine. His pupils were too large, swallowing almost all of the white. He smiled. The train lights dimmed further. At once, heads began to turn. Not smoothly, not naturally. One by one, with stiff, deliberate movements, every face in the carriage pivoted towards me. Hundreds of eyes fixed on a single point. Me. The silence became unbearable, a pressure that pushed against my eardrums until I thought they might burst. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, loud enough that I was certain they could hear it. The child's mouth opened wider. His jaw unhinged slightly, stretching farther than it should, revealing a darkness that seemed too deep for such a small body. "Ticket," he said. His voice didn't come from his throat. It came from everywhere at once, layered and hollow, as if dozens of voices were speaking through him. I don't have one," I stammered. The train screeched. Not brakes, screams. The metal itself seemed to cry out, the sound vibrating through the carriage. The windows fogged instantly, frost crawling across the glass in branching patterns. The passengers began to whisper. Not words, sounds. Wet, broken murmurs that slid under my skin and lodged there. Their mouths moved in unison, lips cracking, jaws trembling, as if reciting something ancient and rehearsed. The child stood. His feet hit the floor with a dull thud. He stepped into the aisle, joints popping softly. With each step towards me, his shadow stretched unnaturally long, bending and warping against the walls. "Everyone rides," he said, once. I backed away until my shoulders hit the cold metal wall of the carriage. There was nowhere to run, no emergency brake, no exit, just endless rows of watching faces and the thing wearing a child's body moving closer. "What happens when we arrive?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The whispering stopped. Every mouth closed at once. The child tilted his head, studying me with something like curiosity. "You stay," he said. The lights went out. For one endless second, the carriage was plunged into total darkness. And then the screens above the doors flickered on. Black and white footage, CCTV, a grainy view of a train platform, snow falling gently, a lone figure standing near the edge. Me, standing exactly where I had been moments ago, staring at a train that hadn't arrived yet. The footage timestamp read December 25th, 3:17 a.m., and the version of me on the screen stepped forward just as the train doors opened. The train had taken me far from the familiar landscape, deeper into the night than I had ever imagined. Outside the frost-covered windows, the world seemed to dissolve into a blur of darkness and flickering shadows. Snow fell incessantly, yet it did not settle. Instead, it hung in the air like suspended motes of light, drifting in impossible patterns, caught between reality and something else entirely. I had long since stopped trying to open the door to exit the carriage. It would not budge. It was as if the train itself had swallowed me whole, carrying me into a realm beyond reason, where time and space no longer obeyed natural law. Inside the carriage, the air had grown colder. My breath formed visible clouds with every wordless exhale, lingering in the compartment like ghostly whispers. The seats, once ordinary, were now frosted over, crystalline patterns etching themselves along the upholstery and window panes. The ice formed in intricate, unnatural shapes, fractals and symbols that seemed to pulse faintly, like they were alive. My fingertips brushed against the icy seat, and a shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I was not alone. The other passengers, or what I assumed were passengers, had appeared suddenly when the train began its deeper, more sinister journey. They were seated in stiff rows, faces obscured by scarves, hoods, and shadow, completely still. Their heads swiveled slowly to follow my movement. No one spoke, no one breathed audibly, yet I could feel their attention like a physical weight pressing against me. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. It was as though the train had swallowed sound itself, leaving only the pulse of something ancient resonating through the metal and wood. I moved down the aisle, each step careful and deliberate. The floor beneath my feet was frozen and slick, yet my shoes made no sound. The carriage stretched further than seemed possible, its walls bending subtly, disorienting me. Every few seconds, I caught glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow, a whisper of motion, gone the moment I focused. The deeper I ventured, the colder the air became, and I could feel my heartbeat slow, dulled by the oppressive cold, as if the train was draining more than just warmth from me. Then I saw it, a reflection in the window opposite me. A figure, pale and faceless, standing just behind one of the shadowed passengers. The passenger's head did not move in response. It remained completely still, unblinking. The figure's form was indistinct, wavering like smoke or mist, yet I knew it was there. It raised a hand, and though no sound came, the gesture was unmistakably deliberate. I stumbled backward, my chest tightening as the air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against my lungs, making every breath a labor. The train gave a sudden lurch, throwing me off balance. The windows darkened as though the night outside had thickened into an impenetrable wall. The lights overhead flickered, dimming and then brightening, casting the passengers' shadowed faces into grotesque relief. They had not moved, yet I sensed them watching, waiting. And then the whispers began. At first faint, barely audible, like the wind slipping through cracks in the metal. Then louder, overlapping, echoing, though no mouths moved. I could feel the sound vibrating in my skull, threading through my thoughts, carrying words I could not comprehend but understood instinctively. Do not leave. Do not look away. You belong here. Panic surged, but I forced myself forward. There was another carriage ahead, larger, its door slightly ajar. A faint golden glow spilled into the icy corridor, warm and inviting against the cold blue of the train. My mind screamed to run towards it, to escape the frozen seats, the shadowed figures, the whispers that clawed at my consciousness. And yet, each step I took felt weighted, slow, as if invisible hands were pressing down on me, urging hesitation, prolonging the terror. When I reached the threshold of the next carriage, the glow expanded, revealing a scene both beautiful and horrifying. The interior resembled a grand dining hall, lavishly decorated for Christmas, yet every detail was subtly wrong. The trees were adorned with ornaments that seemed to shimmer with a life of their own, faces twisting in the reflections of their glass. The garlands moved slightly, like breathing vines, curling and uncurling. The table was set with gleaming silverware, plates stacked impossibly high, candles burning with a cold blue flame. And yet no one sat at the table. The shadows followed me in. The pale, faceless figures emerged from their seats in the frozen carriage, drifting silently behind me into the hall. They did not speak, did not make a sound, yet I could feel their attention like a physical weight pressing against me. I stepped further into the hall. I saw movement at the far end, a figure in red and white, familiar yet impossible. The outline suggested a jolly figure, the kind of Santa Claus found in children's books and decorations, yet the details were wrong. The eyes were too dark, too empty. The smile stretched unnaturally far beyond human proportions. It gestured towards the far door, beckoning silently. My skin crawled. I wanted to turn back, to retreat into the frozen carriage, but I felt drawn forward as though some invisible tether pulled me towards the figure. The frozen passengers followed silently, gliding over the floor with a grace that defied physics. I could hear whispers again, louder now, almost intelligible. "Step forward. Your place is here. You are chosen." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. The warmth of the hall contrasted sharply with the cold that clung to my body, yet it was deceptive. Every step I took forward felt heavier, as if I were moving through water, or worse, through some thick, invisible substance that tried to hold me back. My reflection in the polished floor was not entirely my own. Shadows flickered behind me, forming faces I did not recognize, watching, judging, waiting. And then the figure in red lifted a hand, pointing towards the far door. Beyond it, I could see only darkness, yet it called to me. The train groaned, vibrating beneath my feet, and I realized that this was not a train in the conventional sense. It was something else entirely. A vessel between worlds, between reality and nightmare, and I had been drawn into it without consent. I paused, fighting the compulsion to step forward. I could feel the frozen figures pressing closer, surrounding me, yet they did not touch. They were guardians, sentinels of the unnatural journey, ensuring I could not turn away. The figure in red waited patiently, smile stretching impossibly wide. And then, with a sudden clarity, I understood. This was no ordinary ride. It only ran once a year, yes, but not for the passengers. It ran for me, for anyone who dared to witness it. And once aboard, the choice to leave was an illusion. I took another step. My foot slipped on the icy floor, sending a shiver up my spine. The glow of the candles flickered, revealing glimpses of other figures beyond the doorway, more pale, faceless passengers drifting silently in the darkness. They were waiting, patient, eternal, like statues brought to life. The figure in red moved closer, and the warmth of the hall seemed to melt slightly, revealing ice creeping across the floor like spreading frost. My chest tightened. Panic surged, but it was mingled with a strange, unholy curiosity. I had been drawn into this train, this journey, and I could not escape. And yet the figure's silent beckoning promised understanding, revelation, perhaps even survival, if I did exactly as it desired. I stepped fully into the hall, the door behind me closing with a faint click that echoed like a gunshot in the icy corridors. The figure in red extended both hands, inviting, commanding, a mixture of warmth and horror that twisted my stomach. The shadows leaned closer, forming a bridge between the frozen carriages and this unnatural dining hall, and I realized with a bone-deep shiver that I had reached the midpoint of the journey, and the true horror, The full extent of the Christmas train's purpose was only beginning. I could not turn back. I could not run. And somewhere deep inside, I understood. The train would not release me willingly, and the night ahead promised revelations I might never survive. The train was alive, the passengers were eternal, and the figure in red was waiting to claim its due. The air inside the hall had a strange weight, oppressive and thick, pressing down on my shoulders and chest with each careful step I took. The figure in red remained motionless, its faceless visage tilted slightly as if studying me, measuring my fear. The frozen passengers lingered at the periphery, silent, statuesque, eyes, if they had any, trained on me with unwavering intensity. I realized then, with a cold surge of understanding, that I was the only one in motion, the only variable. They were eternal. I was a visitor, a pawn, and this train was designed to reveal its purpose only to me. I moved further into the hall. The golden glow of the candles illuminated grotesque details I had not noticed at first glance. The ornaments on the twisted tree reflected faces, twisted, screaming faces, not my own, not human, yet disturbingly familiar. The silverware on the table gleamed unnaturally. Some pieces appeared to be moving, inching imperceptibly toward me as if drawn by some unseen hand. The cold was still there, biting at my skin, yet it was accompanied by a heat that seems to emanate from the center of the hall, a core of unnatural energy pulsing beneath the floorboards, or perhaps within the train itself. I approached the far door. Beyond it, darkness spread like a void, yet I sensed movement within that blackness, rhythms that whispered promises and threats in the same breath. The figure in red gestured again, inviting me forward, its form stretching slightly, edges flickering like candle smoke. I knew instinctively that the next carriage would hold the true heart of the train, its purpose, its secret. The door creaked open as I reached for it. Frost spiraled around the edges, curling like serpents, but it yielded under my trembling fingers. I stepped through, and the temperature dropped sharply, so cold it burned my lungs. The light of the hall vanished, replaced by an abyss of swirling shadows. The air thrummed with energy, vibrating with a tone that resonated deep in my bones. I realized then that this was not just a train, it was a vessel, a bridge between the mundane and the supernatural, and I had been drawn into its engine of horror. Inside the next carriage, the seats were gone. The walls shimmered like liquid silver, reflecting distorted versions of myself in infinite repetition. The floor was a mirror, but not a true reflection. Each image moved slightly out of sync with reality, grinning, gesturing, mimicking gestures I had not yet made. The temperature shifted between freezing cold and stifling heat, a rhythm that forced me to stumble, unsteady on my feet. Shadows writhed along the walls, and the whispers began again. Countless voices, overlapping, layering, calling my name, urging me forward. At the center of the carriage was a platform, elevated slightly above the mirrored floor. Upon it sat a box, small, unassuming, yet radiating power. Its surface pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and I felt a compulsion stronger than anything I had ever known, to open it. My mind screamed at me to resist, to turn and flee, but I knew that was impossible. The figure in red drifted toward the box, the edges of its form rippling like liquid, a silent guardian of the secret it held. I took hesitant steps forward, each one measured against the force pressing down on me. The whispers grew louder, forming words I could finally comprehend. "It is yours. It chooses. It waits for you to claim it." My fingers brushed the box. A jolt of energy shot through me, cold and electric at once, as though the air itself had become a living entity. Shadows surged from the walls, coiling around my arms, my legs, attempting to tether me, to claim me. The frozen passengers appeared beside me, reaching toward the box, faceless and insistent, Yet I felt no malice in them, only expectation. They were guardians, witnesses, guides, ensuring that I fulfilled my role. The lid of the box lifted easily under my trembling fingers. Inside was a small object wrapped in crimson cloth. As I pulled it free, the carriage shuddered violently, the silver walls rippling violently, as though the train itself were alive and breathing. The whispers became a roar, layering into one voice, clearer than any before. "Take it, accept it, your fate is sealed." I peered at the object. It was a miniature train, intricately carved with tiny carriages that gleamed as though polished by some eternal hand. The detail was impeccable, yet the motion within it was impossible. The miniature train moved, endlessly circling its tiny tracks, carrying faceless miniature passengers who mimicked the very horrors I had witnessed. I could see myself in one of the carriages, seated and frozen, trapped in perpetuity. My stomach turned. The figure in red gestured again, motionless yet undeniably powerful, and I understood. The train had chosen me. The Christmas train only ran once a year, but it did not merely transport, it recruited. It drew passengers into its eternal journey, granting glimpses of the living world for those it claimed, but never releasing them. The object in my hands was both key and curse, a link between the miniature train and the eternal one that carried me now. Panic surged, yet with it came understanding. The whispers softened, becoming coaxing. "You are part of the story now, part of the ride. It will return, as it always does." I realized then that escape was impossible. I could not leave the train, nor could I abandon the miniature box. It was my tether, my burden, my proof that I had passed the test. The figure in red moved closer, and I felt the air thrum with power. Shadows rose from the floor like dark waves, stretching to the ceiling, and the temperature shifted again, cold and unyielding. With trembling hands, I returned the miniature train to the platform. The carriage quaked violently, silver walls rippling, mirrors reflecting infinite versions of myself, reaching, grasping, trembling. The frozen passengers aligned along the edges of the carriage, faceless and solemn, witnesses to the culmination of the journey. The figure in red drifted to the center, raising its arms slightly, commanding yet silent. And then the carriage stopped moving. The mirrors solidified, the shadows stilled. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the faint ticking of some impossible clock, counting time I could not understand. The figure in red remained before me, unwavering, a silent promise that the journey was not over, but the next stage would begin when the train ran again. I sank to the mirrored floor, exhausted, frozen, yet oddly exhilarated. I understood the truth now. The Christmas train did not exist to transport, to delight, or to deliver gifts. It existed to claim, to mark, to create passengers for its eternal voyage. Every year it returned, seeking those who were curious, those who were drawn to it, those who would reach for the heart of the train. And I had. The platform beneath the miniature box pulsed once, twice, and then the glow faded. The silver walls shimmered and solidified, the frozen air settling into a calm chill. I looked up. The figure in red remained at the center, waiting, patient, eternal. The frozen passengers drifted back into the shadows. The whispers receded, leaving only silence. Yet I knew they were still there, listening, ready to awaken with the train's next journey. I rose to my feet, heart pounding. The miniature train remained on the platform, a testament to what had happened, a tether to the eternal ride. I understood in a way that chilled me to the bone that my life had been irrevocably changed. I would never see the world in the same way again. The train had claimed me, even if only partially, and its influence would linger, calling me back when the next ride began. As I finally made my way back to the main hall, the glow of the original candles dimmed, and the frozen carriages stretched infinitely behind me, silent witnesses to my ordeal. The figure in red waited at the far doorway, motionless but commanding, and I understood the cruelest truth. The train did not care about escape, only participation. Those who boarded became part of its eternal story, witnesses to horrors beyond comprehension, forever tied to the one night it ran. I stepped forward toward the exit, clutching the miniature train, knowing that when the train ran again next year, it would call me back, and I would answer, as all who were marked eventually do. The train shuddered beneath me as I clutched the miniature, crimson-wrapped train, the pulse of its eerie glow syncing with the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Every carriage I had traversed was now a memory frozen in time. The ice-crusted seats, the faceless passengers, the hall of impossible Christmas cheer, and the figure in red, eternal and unyielding. I understood fully now that the train was more than a vessel. It was a predator, patient, unrelenting, and infinitely ancient. The corridor before me stretched endlessly, yet I could sense movement, subtle shifts in the shadows, as if the train itself were breathing. My breath fogged in front of me, swirling into shapes I could not decipher. The golden glow from the hall had vanished, replaced by darkness so thick it pressed against my eyes. I took a tentative step forward. The frozen passengers moved silently alongside me, faceless guardians, keeping pace without touching me. Their presence was oppressive yet strangely ceremonial, as if they were ushering me toward a fate I could not refuse. I reached the final carriage, the air growing colder with each step. Frost spiraled along the edges of the doorway, curling into shapes that resembled hands, reaching, beckoning, warning. Inside, the scene that greeted me was both magnificent and horrifying. The carriage was vast, larger than any structure I had ever known, its ceiling lost in shadow. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting infinite versions of the train, the passengers, and me. And at the center, suspended above the mirrored floor, was the full-size figure in red, faceless and impossibly tall, arms outstretched as if embracing the void itself. The whispers returned, a chorus of voices so loud it felt as if my skull might crack. But beneath them, one voice emerged, calm, commanding. "This is your final stop. You must choose, become part of the ride or be left behind in the frozen echo." I staggered back, gripping the miniature train. My mind raced. I had been marked, tethered, and partially claimed. I understood now that the train's power extended beyond its carriages. It reached into the mind, bending thought, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. The figure in red beckoned silently, waiting, patient. My instincts screamed to flee, yet the train had already ensnared me. Escape was an illusion. Participation was inevitable. Suddenly, the carriage shifted violently, walls bending, mirrors fracturing and reforming. The frozen passengers glided toward the central platform, surrounding me. Their faceless gazes pressed into my mind, merging with the whispers. I felt the pull of the miniature train, its pulse now a heartbeat stronger than my own, guiding me toward the platform. It was as if the tiny object contained the essence of the entire journey, the secret core of the Christmas train. My hand hovered over the platform, trembling. I could hear the distorted echoes of past passengers, their fear, their resignation, layering over the murmurs of the present. The figure in red lowered its arms, tilting its head slightly, signaling the gravity of the choice. To claim the miniature train fully was to commit myself entirely, to merge with the ride, to become one of the eternal passengers who would never leave. I swallowed hard, sweat mingling with the chill of the carriage. The frozen passengers leaned closer, their silence now clear, almost encouraging. "Step forward, claim it. Your journey has already begun." My fingers closed around the miniature train. The instant I did, the platform beneath me pulsed, and the mirrors rippled like liquid silver. Shadows coiled around my legs, lifting me slightly, guiding me toward the figure in red. The temperature swung violently between ice and fire, freezing and burning at once. The whispers became a deafening roar, promises, threats, demands, and the laughter of the train itself. I was suspended above the mirrored floor, a thin line between reality and nightmare. The figure in red approached, its faceless head tilting, edges flickering, radiating a power that I could not comprehend. And then the train shuddered violently, as if sensing my hesitation. The frozen passengers pressed closer, yet they did not touch, maintaining a ceremonial distance. Their silence, once passive, now seemed commanding, guiding me to a conclusion I could neither escape nor alter. The miniature train pulsed in my hands, and I realized with a bone-chilling clarity this was the vessel of my soul, the link between the eternal ride and my consciousness. To release it, to refuse the claim, would shatter the tether and leave me lost in the corridors of the train forever, trapped between carriages, in frozen purgatory, a ghost among shadows. To embrace it was to survive, to ascend, yet to belong eternally to the ride. I hesitated. Time stretched impossibly, minutes dissolving into seconds, seconds folding into infinity. The figure in red extended both arms, inviting, demanding, radiating a warmth that was entirely false, masking the cold truth beneath. The mirrors around me reflected infinite possibilities. Me seated in one carriage, frozen and watching. Me drifting alongside faceless passengers, faceless myself. Me standing like now at the heart of the train, ready to choose. The whispers intensified, layered with anticipation, curiosity, hunger. I felt the pull, the insistent gravity of the train itself, urging me to claim my place, to accept the inevitability. My fingers tightened around the miniature train. The platform pulsed once more, shadows coiled upward, enveloping me in darkness, yet I could see the figure in red clearly, standing like a gatekeeper to eternity. Finally, with a trembling breath, I stepped forward. The miniature train glowed violently in my hands, and the platform beneath me pulsed once more, lifting me entirely from the mirrored floor. The frozen passengers leaned in, silent witnesses, guiding me toward the figure. The temperature shifted once again, cold and burning at once. I felt the train's pulse merge with my heartbeat, syncing in rhythm, tethering me to its eternal cycle. The figure in red accepted my presence without gesture or word. The shadows melted into the air, the mirrors solidified, and a profound silence fell over the carriage. I understood fully now. I was both observer and participant, chosen, claimed. The train would run again next year, seeking others, yet I would remain tethered, a bridge between the mortal world and the eternal journey. As the train shuddered once more, preparing to continue its impossible route, I looked out the nearest window. Snow fell outside, silent and serene. The world beyond the tracks appeared normal, yet I knew it was merely a mask. The train carried secrets that could never fully return to reality. And as it moved forward, deeper into the night, I understood the final truth. Curiosity had its price, and some journeys are designed not to end, but to continue forever. I had chosen, and the Christmas train had claimed its passenger. The lights in the carriage dimmed, the mirrors reflecting my face one final time, serene yet haunted. The figure in red drifted to the far end of the carriage, motionless and eternal, while the frozen passengers returned to their silent stations. I settled into my place, clutching the miniature train, feeling the pulse of the eternal ride beneath my hands, ready to witness another impossible Christmas morning, and knowing that next year the train would run again. And when it did, it would wait for me, patient, eternal, and hungry.